There's a deeper layer to so-called cursed images that only really becomes clear when you stop looking at them as isolated visuals and start examining the systems around them, how they were introduced, how they spread, and how belief formed around them. What makes these images unsettling is rarely the content alone. It's the interplay between image, narrative framing, and the viewer's own expectations. The expressionless is a strong example of how narrative can completely override visual evidence. The story is often presented in a clinical, almost report-like format, describing a woman who appeared in a hospital with an unnaturally blank face, animalistic behavior, and violent tendencies. The tone mimics medical documentation, which gives it an artificial sense of credibility. The image associated with it varies depending on the version, but it typically shows a pale woman with smoothed or distorted facial features, sometimes edited to remove detail or exaggerate symmetry. When you analyze it closely, it becomes clear that the image is manipulated. Lighting inconsistencies, unnatural skin texture, and digital smoothing all point to post-processing. However, the story primes the viewer to interpret these flaws as evidence rather than artifacts. The curse element emerges from implication, the idea that this is not just a picture, but a record of something that should not exist. In reality, there is no verifiable incident, no hospital record, and no confirmed original photograph. It is a constructed piece of horror designed to feel like leaked documentation, and its effectiveness comes from how convincingly it imitates that format. The Hands Resist Him, painted by Bill Stoneham, operates on a very different level because it is undeniably real and has a traceable history. Created in the 1970s, the painting depicts a young boy and a doll-like figure standing before a glass door, behind which numerous hands press outward from darkness. The imagery itself is symbolic rather than literal, with the artist later explaining that the hands represent alternate lives or possibilities, while the doll acts as a guide between worlds. The curse narrative did not appear until decades later, when the painting was sold online, with a description claiming that viewers experienced movement within the image, nightmares, or physical discomfort. What's important here is timing. The supernatural claims were introduced long after the painting's creation, reframing it retroactively. Psychologically, this is powerful. Once a viewer is told that something might move, their perception becomes hyperalert to small details, shifts in light, changes in focus, or even their own eye movement. The painting itself does not change, but the act of looking becomes unstable. There is no credible evidence of paranormal activity with it, but the combination of unsettling imagery and suggestive framing makes it feel plausible in the moment. The Grifter takes a more sensory approach to discomfort. Unlike the previous two, it does not rely heavily on a detailed backstory, but instead on the immediate impact of the image itself. The face shown is distorted to the point where normal human recognition begins to fail. The eyes are often too wide or asymmetrical, the mouth stretched into an unnatural shape, and the overall proportions slightly misaligned. These distortions trigger what is known as the uncanny valley effect, where something appears almost human but deviates in subtle ways that create unease. The image quality, often degraded, compressed, or intentionally blurred, adds another layer. The brain tries to resolve the image, to make sense of what it is seeing, but cannot fully succeed. Stories attached to the Grifter claim psychological effects such as paranoia or lingering anxiety, but these can be explained through suggestion and expectation. When a viewer is told that an image is harmful, they monitor their own reactions more closely, which can amplify normal discomfort into something that feels significant. There is no verified origin or confirmed creator, but the image is widely believed to be digitally manipulated, possibly built from a real photograph, and then altered beyond recognition. Portrait of God is perhaps the most abstract of the four, and in many ways the most conceptually interesting. Unlike the others, it often lacks a single definitive image. Instead, it exists as a description or a loosely defined visual, something dark, ambiguous, and open to interpretation. The curse here is tied to the idea that looking at it reveals something profound or terrifying, sometimes framed as an encounter with something beyond human comprehension. What makes this effective is that it shifts the burden entirely onto the viewer. Without a fixed image, the mind begins to construct its own version, influenced by personal fears and expectations. Even when an image is provided, it is usually indistinct, shadows, vague shapes, or forms that resist clear identification. This ambiguity forces the brain to search for patterns, a process known as pareidolia, where random stimuli are interpreted as meaningful images. The longer one looks, the more the mind fills in details, often in ways that become increasingly unsettling. There is no evidence of any real origin or supernatural property. The entire phenomenon exists as a kind of psychological mirror, reflecting back whatever the viewer brings to it. In the end, what becomes clear through deeper analysis is that cursed images are less about the images themselves and more about how they are framed and received. The expressionless uses structured storytelling to simulate reality. The hands resist him gains power from its status as a real object reinterpreted through suggestion. The grifter relies on visual distortion and perceptual instability. Portrait of God removes structure almost entirely, forcing the viewer to generate meaning on their own. None of them are cursed in any literal sense, but each one demonstrates a different way in which belief, expectation, and perception can interact to produce a genuine emotional response. The enduring impact of these images lies in that interaction. Even when you understand their origins, even when you can explain every element rationally, there is often still a moment of hesitation, a slight resistance to looking too long or too closely. That reaction is not evidence of anything supernatural, but it is real. It shows how easily the mind can be influenced by context, and how thin the line can be between seeing something and believing something about what you see.